Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Story of a Startup. Jessica and I are so excited to introduce you to one of my mentors and someone I've worked with over the past couple of years, Jesse McMullin, who has 5 startups, 5 exits, and 5 daughters. He's a great guy. There's lots of nuggets of wisdom, and enjoy the show. Jesse, thank you so much for being part of our conversation today. I'm sure that while I was late to join, you and Jessica already met, but Jesse, if you want to give a bit of an introduction on your entrepreneurial journey, we can start there, and then I know we sent some questions ahead of time, and we'll get into those afterwards, but where do you want to anchor us with your approach to entrepreneurship, ventures that you've had in the past, and the introduction that you want to lead with?
So I don't have an introduction per se to lead with. So I tend to lead with more of an organic response, and I got a really weird encyclopedia of experiences that tend to bring value to some and not value to others. But so it's let it go where it's going to go. I have 5 startups and I have 5 exits. None of them are in the same industry. My first was an urgent care family practice and women's health clinic. I had gotten into medicine from my time in the military. I was a team's medic. I was what you got for a doc. And my choice when I got out was to go to PA school for 1 year, which is half the time. But I didn't want to do that anymore. I felt I was pretty drained from the graphicness of the things that I had seen. But I was really good at the science. I've always been really good at the science and always really good at commercializing the science. And I've always been a really good leader. So I started doing turnarounds in healthcare. And the turnarounds in healthcare got me a really broad experience in seeing what's right and what's really wrong. And then I got a wild hair and said, I wonder if we can just do one right from the ground up. Instead of constantly turning around, I did 5 turnarounds of clinics. And I was like, I wonder if I can do it right from the ground up. So I found a doc who was burned out of the emergency room. She wasn't ready to retire. And she said, I'm sick of this. And she said, I'm sick of the emergency room. I'm not ready to get out of it yet, but I don't know what to do next. And I said, let me show you how to get out of it. And I put together a plan and sat down and showed her, and she's like, perfect, let's do it. And that led to Oasis Medical Center. We grew that to 5 times. We built 5 times what any of our nearest competitors could do. We had a pristine location. Our guerrilla marketing approach was better than most doctors aren't willing to do that, and we were. We partnered better with the community than anybody else did, and we were the world's first digital native clinic. From all the research we can tell, we were the world's first in 2006. Everything was digital when we went in, and we also created online scheduling. Before it was a thing. It was a really crude and ugly product, but you could do it on your computer at home, and you could request an appointment online. So that was pretty cool. While I was doing that, I started getting bored running it, and found myself standing in the aisle of a grocery store looking at the whole aisle of vitamins. And when I was looking at those vitamins, I was like, how much am I supposed to take? I was like, you look at the back of the bottle and it's based on a 2,000 calorie a day diet. Well, that's not true. The RDA is actually based on a 40-year-old postmenopausal woman, and it was formulated in the 1980s. And that is what we have for nutrition labeling today. So I said, there's got to be a better way. I didn't know what it was, but I knew there was something to our unique genes, something that made us unique in who we were. So we created NutriCode, and that was the world's first DNA-based sports nutrition company, partnered with really renowned, really awesome scientists, where we looked at 16 SNPs, or single nucleotide polymorphisms, which is what dictates your hair color, your eye color, your height, and your weight. And those just are set in stone. But we looked at vitamin receptors on your body and how their body metabolized them. Did you have more of a Prius or did you have more of a Mack truck? Did you need more fuel or less to be healthy? And from there, we built customized nutrition for that. It didn't get very far before we sold it, meaning that we had about 13,000 reorders a month on this direct-to-consumer thing. But within 3 months, we were acquired by a multi-level marketing company whose name I can't say, and they adopted the technology. The FDA came in knocking on their door and said, "You guys can't diagnose and treat." And so we took the diagnosis part and gave it to a research university. Did that, and then I exited that first. Then I exited the clinic to a hospital system where they gave me $1 billion P&L, 40 cost centers, 2,500 employees, and said fix it. And I generated $1 billion of new revenue doing entrepreneurial work, right? Being entrepreneurial, but entrepreneurial inside the organization, creating a new narrow network insurance product for this hospital system. And then I got tired. I was brokering plastics on the backside. I know there's going to be some swear words on that, but I started brokering plastics on the backside. Then I started designing packaging. Then I was making about 9 times my salary in and shipping truckloads of PET or HDPE type of packaging, and that turned into my new job. Then we started designing what would go into packaging. When I did that, I created my first manufacturing facility, and then from manufacturing facility to manufacturing facility, we had a design innovation firm where we would create. We created 140 consumer products while using really cool technology. Like back then, in 2012, we were using Microsoft Vision to look at the aisles in stores and seeing where people were, but more importantly, where they weren't, and innovating in those cold spaces in the aisle. And we would design food or beverage products for consumable products for these big companies. We do all the persona work. We do all the research in the category, all of the velocity, the price positioning, and person work that goes to that product. And we would engineer the product, and then build the supply chain, put it in front of someone from a Fortune 100 company, and say, "Here's your next product." And they would always say, "That's fantastic, thanks, but what's going to stop us from just ripping you off?" And I said, "Because it takes you 9 months to get to where I am at right now. I have a manufacturing line. I already have everything built. I can build this for you truckloads by the end of the month. And you won't be able to do that. And besides, I'll go talk to Nestle if you say no." And they'd always say yes. And they said yes 140 times. Then I acquired a brand in CPG and turned that brand around in beverage. And we exited all of those in about 21. And then I started doing consulting where I met Dominick. And there is my resume, as it were.
No, I mean, it's all fascinating. I was curious as you were talking. I mean, I think from like an outside perspective, it's interesting to hear sort of, obviously there's more to it, but like the way you describe it feels very almost like nonchalant, like these things just sort of happened. And I'm curious about like those moments, kind of like you were talking about in the grocery store, and like those little trigger moments of like, what is it that made you want to follow those particular businesses at those times? I think that's kind of an interesting point for me. Like what drives it? Is it the business opportunity? Is it like a personal passion or something you were into at the time, or that kind of thing? I think just in terms of, I guess, what motivates the business decision was something that was coming up for me as you were saying that.
Sure. So when I left out my biggest exit in there, and we can go talk about that at a later time, because that one had a very different approach. But the rest of these were always around a degree of consumer pain or human pain. And there's also, as I found from entrepreneurs, there's usually a degree of arrogance. And I don't mean that from like I'm better than you, but it's I can fix that, right? That thought that we just believe that we can. And I tell people it's like I'm too stupid to know that I can't. Of course I can start a clinic from the ground up. Of course patients are going to come from zero. Of course I can take an emergency room physician who's never had a patient following before in her life and create a 6,000 patient panel. Of course I can. Right? I mean, it doesn't make sense when you think about it in that lens. When you try to step back, it's foolish. But when I recognize the pain, in this case, it was a female provider who was the product, and she didn't understand her value to the patient journey, and she didn't recognize that there are a lot of really bad doctors out there. But I had spent at that point 7 years, 8 years in patient care, and a lot of providers were not her, and she had something special. So that was an opportunity to commercialize a product and productize medicine in a new and different way. So the approach is usually around pain, but that case we thought we could do it better. And that's why we trademarked the phrase what healthcare should be. And it guided every choice that we made. But usually it's around the commercialization around pain. For me, I recognize pain. I pay attention to how big that segment is, how many people are affected by it. And I do it again and again and again in different areas. The clinic was the first time I didn't. And I will say that most people in their first entrepreneurial venture, they don't necessarily go in with the end in mind. They just know that they want to do a thing. They want to build a thing. They want to build a better thing, a better widget. They can do it better. They have a better supply chain. They have a better formula. They have a better taste. They have a better product. They have a better digital product. So they want to make the thing better, and they're motivated by that. And then they get into that zone of running that business as long and as hard as they can. And that's certainly how I started with Oasis, was that way. My second, third, fourth, and fifth were not that way at all.
It's interesting coming from that perspective of consumer pain and solving those types of, pain problems as a market opportunity. And then from that perspective, when you were able to, get the inspiration to come to the aisle, right? And the aisle, being able to understand where people were not going, what were some of those insights that you were able to take and say, hey, these are the reason that people are skipping this part of the shelf. This is where they're being unfulfilled. And this is why there's an opportunity for us to come in there and solve that for them.
Okay. So that was understanding the RDA. So when I started NutriCode, NutriCode was me, personal pain, standing in an aisle, not knowing which vitamins to take. That was, and then it turned into qualitative research from there, trying to talk to folks in the aisle, talking to people who were buying vitamins and asking them why they were. And my doctor's like, hey, you should, vitamins are good. But of course, nobody told you how much to take. So that piece of pain for me was interesting to go out untrained at that point, simply just through natural curiosity, to explore a pain channel and confusion. At that time, there's a ton of claims on labels, and you couldn't believe any of them, or you didn't know what to believe because everybody said their thing was better. Dr. Oz was on TV every other day talking about a new magical plant that you had to get. At that time, it was like Garcinia cambogia or rose hips and forskolin. I mean, I made a fortune on those names I just told you right there. but there was a lot of confusion because, like, what does standardization mean? When you look at the back of a label, it said it was standardized to certain polyphenol or a certain plant extract. But what did that mean? How much of them am I getting? Or is it not? Is it just 100% root? Or is it 100% raspberry? We think 100% raspberry is better. There was so much confusion around these things that we thought, well, can we bring a degree of clarity? Can we bring clarity, and what better way to do that than personalizing the vitamin aisle? And that's what we thought, and it was fairly hot. The FDA thought it was hot too. Like I mentioned, they weren't too happy with the diagnosing and treating aspect, so we had to fix that quickly. But from that aisle is where I built the rest of that career, because I've always been in that sciencey side of commercial goods or of consumer goods. It's always been a degree of health product of some sort, and but when we got to paying attention to that aisle, I learned a lot of things, and then I got more trained through my master's degree, where I was able to study under people like Nancy Napier, who is by far one of the most amazing innovators out there, who is able to go into organizations and help them innovate on purpose. So I was able to look at I had these 2 startups under my belt, and she was able to help me think about doing it on purpose. Again, taking the knowledge that I had, the science, and then expanding from there. That led me to humans have the answer. One of the pieces of one of the axioms I live by is go ask them. We always try to, as product designers, we always try to think, we're trying to guess what humans want, and we're always afraid to ask them. The problem is humans don't know exactly what they want. So you have to ask them more about needs. How are they having their needs met? How are their needs not being met? And then from there, being able to connect the dots. And that's what we were doing at Raw Pharma when we created those 140 consumer products for the shelf. Those 140 products, it started with observing, standing in the aisles, and then talking to people in the aisles. And then it was holding our phones up and recording. And then it's like, well, is there something else we can do that's less creepy? And then that's what got us to cameras in the aisle. How can we install a camera but not record anything? We didn't record a thing. That was the cool thing about Microsoft Vision, is it just created data, and we gave it a synthetic shelf that we designed for it, and it would just show hot and cold, and then we would go and put a planogram on top of that, so we could show brands what was actually happening in the aisle. That the driver behind that was this natural curiosity, but at that point I was doing it on purpose. I had recognized the talent of ethnography and meeting needs, that I was really good at identifying human needs and then commercializing, or identifying that pain of the root cause of the pain, and then developing products that soothe or ease that pain for that consumer, that buying group. And I got really, really good at that, and that piece of training made it so I was pretty bulletproof at it.
Yeah, you were getting your reps in, which is awesome. And one thing I want to kind of explore is just, you're talking about using Microsoft Vision and you creating heat maps and planograms. And there's something in there about the power of data to really tell a story. So what kinds of, for entrepreneurs who are trying to understand how to really communicate effectively, what pieces or like metrics do you find resonate the most, either with the consumer or with investors who are learning about a particular new product or type of solution that an entrepreneur is creating?
Those are very different. If I'm understanding you correctly, you're asking me about like how do I know what around the human desire of a consumer and the desire around an investor, and then how do I tap into that? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, let's maintain both as separate threads, but I think they're worthwhile questions. I know people would be curious to hear your opinion on.
So human desires are rooted pretty deeply into our core, and they dictate our intent. They precede our intents, what we intend to do, and who do we intend to be perceived as. So when we look at a label, we're reading claims on a label, we're intending to become better by some fashion. We went, or for whatever reason, healthfulness equals power, or healthfulness creates envy. Beauty creates envy. For whatever reason, that's core to who we are as a human being based on our upbringing. There are segments of us that are that way. And the goal is to find, when you're designing the products, is how big is that segment? How big is that desire that is rooted inside of humanity around the product you're putting in front of them, especially around like health products. And a lot of us live in this world of ideal state. We buy a skincare product based on the ideal state, that what it's going to create for me, not my present state. I don't buy a cream to be exactly how I am right now. I don't take a vitamin or a supplement to stay exactly as I am right now. I buy it for this fictitious version in front of me that I hope to become one day. Well, how big is that category? How big is that segment? How big is that pain? So when you looked at the Garcinias and the forskolins, those were things that were supposed to help you magically lose weight by somehow tricking part of the hypothalamus of the brain. And it's true. If you had a large enough dose of the phytoactive ingredients, then yes, it would work and do that. But most of it was garbage. So in a world where education is the differentiator, or you have to sell through education, like my product is better than yours, it's the most expensive way to go to market. And what we found was easier in that space was telling easy stories around macro ingredients, around macro problems that are more easily understood, like protein. And moving and understanding that humans will innately buy protein, but taste was most important. So you had to make a protein that tasted better than everybody else. So when we were working with, I think of a name I can drop, Lenny and Larry. When we were working with Lenny and Larry, their human problem that they had is that they made a cookie that tasted really, really good. For as much protein as it had in it, but the macros were pretty bad. Like the fat and the sugars or carbohydrates in it were not great. But you felt better about yourself because of the 16 grams of protein that you were getting per cookie. When we approached him, we said, there's other ways of doing what you're doing. We can build a base formula for you that meets the macro of your target audience. So we understood who his demographic was, through spying on his customers at the shelf, and it was a customer who he didn't know that he had, and we interviewed them and got to know their pain and built a relationship based on that persona, and we would intentionally seek out that persona more to find out what their education was and how they lived and what their ideal state was. We found them on social media and how they portrayed themselves. And we came back to him and talked to him about like mug muffins that actually had more healthfulness associated with it with lower consequence. So better taste, add powder, and it's just taking powder and water and microwaving it. And it turns into a muffin and it rose, and it actually tasted pretty darn good. And it was 100% plant-based. When he tried it, he fell in love with it. He loved that taste. He loved that texture, and he didn't give a crap about the macros behind it, other than the amount of protein that was in it. So finding that the the tests that while we're solving consumer problems, it's not always the same of what the goal of the brand is. He cared about making protein fun, and that was his driver. And what we found is that the disconnect between what he thought was fun and what the human need was, what people are actually buying was a huge disconnect. So we accidented into building a better product for them, and we consequently just designed their entire protein line for powders, for their muffins, for their cookies, for their brownies, for everything, because we were able to show him that what his ideal state, what he thought his customer's ideal state was, and what the consumer's actual ideal state was different. And we found that we could speak to the consumer just by asking them you didn't ask them, what do you want out of a muffin? You ask them, once they've already picked it up and bought it, what they're hoping to get out of life, what they're hoping to be able to do out of their workout. Why are they working out, and who are they working out for, and who would they target to impress? If they would tell you who they were trying to impress and why they were trying to impress them, that gets to desires. So designing a consumer product, even for a brand as successful as Lenny and Larry was at that time, for them, designing a product was making protein fun, but they missed a larger part of that segment and their actual pain and the problem of what he was solving. And that's what we found for most companies out there, is they tend to miss a piece of it. And if you pay attention to that, there's a lot of money to be made for entrepreneurs if they're better at identifying the pain and the problem of the actual end user, and finding a creative way a clever way of either telling the consumer or telling a B2B like we were doing. When it comes to an investor, that's very different. You have to be able to speak like you know the problem, the pain, and the solution better than anybody else. And they will not often be experts in your area, right? When you're getting the easy money, they're not experts in your area. The hard to get money, the smart money, well, they are experts in your area, and they want to own the entire category. And you can't speak emotionally to them. You have to speak in facts and figures and forecasts and justify where it's at. But you have to be able to distill it down to a fourth grade reading level, and you have to do it fast, or they'll lose interest. But if it's friendly money, or if it's dumb money, then simply speaking to human conditions to them and how you can solve that problem, they tend to invest in you because they believe that you can solve the problem better than someone else can. Both are around desires. So all three of these type of buyers, so the smart money, the not so smart money, and the consumer, are all around desires. The smart money wants to look smart. They want to be perceived as geniuses, that they want to be perceived as making smart money decisions so that they can attract more smart money and larger tranches of money into their venture capital pools. Dumb money wants to be, and I'm not calling them unintelligent. It's not well-read money. And it's easier money to get. Those angel investors tend to just want to solve a problem, and they want to connect in a human way to a human problem with a human solution. But they want to be able to believe that you have the credentials and the background and the ability to do it, to deliver. So they can see themselves as helping. They want to be a part of the thing. Their desire is to be perceived as a good guy. And the consumer, well, their desires, there's 16 human desires, and that you have to align you have to align the product to one of those 16 desires in order to get there. But desires tend to always show their face. Long answer. Hopefully I got to it.
You crushed that, and I think desires methodology is a really important tool for any entrepreneur to understand, right? And I think you'd agree with this when you're launching a new product, just making sure you have that clear mission and a vision up front that's connecting to a problem to solve, and then understanding what desire you're actually targeting will bring a lot of what your positioning and your message and a lot of those things that can take time. It will make that journey easier and clearer. Is that something you'd agree with?
Yeah, sure.
There's so much psychology involved, and that almost feels very central to all the important decision making. So do you feel like I always like to ask people too, like taking it back to not necessarily your first venture, but even like your childhood. Do you feel like there were influences in your life that made you have that ability to see things the way you see them and be able to identify the opportunities and like that type of thing and find the solutions to the pain points?
Absolutely. I believe that entrepreneurs are born and not made.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is when I was adopted 3 times.
Oh, wow.
Right. As a little one. And that's created a lot of how I interact with the world and my EQ score and my ability to be able to look at humans and read their faces and read their intents a little bit differently. Like it's all programmatic response. But when I ended up in the house where I became McMullin, the McMullin household, I was about 3 years old. There's a couple, like 2 months from my 3rd birthday. The day I arrived in that house, I walked out the front door and my parents had no idea where I went. I went 2 houses up and I didn't speak very well. I talk a lot now. I made up for it ever since. But I went 2 houses down on the street in Missoula, Montana, and I rang a doorbell and talked to a lady by the name of Ann Wynn. And I just babbled to her and she had no idea who I was. And my parents hadn't had time to go and tell the neighbors, hey, look at, here's a new kid, they didn't know who I was. But, so the police got called and, and then you take that and, I was always a wanderer and I would walk into the backyard of my neighbors' houses and climb their trees and play in their sandboxes and whatnot as a very curious, kid, which shows you that I didn't really understand boundaries. Right. I didn't really see restrictions. Yeah. I asked a lot of why are they there? I recognize a lot of that in Dominick that like, why is that? And why do we have to do things this way? And it's that challenging that has led to me becoming that, me recognizing my role as an entrepreneur and a change maker. So another part of that wandering, it's kind of a fun story is that I was so bad at it at about age 4 or so, and I can still see this in my mind's eye. I remember doing it. My mom telling the story in me is a little bit different, but I'll tell it from my mom's perspective. My mom got tired of me running around, and I was full of energy inside the house, and so she wanted me to be outside and play around, and so she thought it was a great idea to tie a rope to the laundry line that extended off the back of our porch across our backyard, to tie that to my belt loop in my pants. And it made a horrendous sound. The wheels made a horrendous sound. And so now I was just running around the backyard, and she was out there washing her hands, and she had a clear view of the backyard, washing her hands at that sink, and she recognized she wasn't hearing that sound. And so she looked out the window and followed the line to see my pants without me in them.
Oh my God.
and I was 4 houses over playing with their dog. And she would just go in the backyard and just yell like Dennis the Menace. I mean, I swear that was me. And she would yell, Jesse, and I would yell back, yeah. Okay, just want to make sure that you're around, and that was my childhood. So what does that have to do with becoming where I'm at now? I mentioned boundaries. I mentioned that natural curiosity that was just there, and the challenging of why. I didn't know how to put those together until I joined the military, and they saw how good I was. I graduated high school with a 1.7 GPA.
Nice.
Most people don't get to graduate high school at all with that. I made up all my grades with A's in my senior year, and I had to take extra classes to get it, but I did all the requirements and I was able to graduate. Turns out when I was in the Army, they diagnosed me with dyslexia and dysgraphia, and it shows like why I was always learning differently, which was the destination. I always start with a destination and work backwards from there. As a kid, I didn't look at like my pants and say, how do I get out of them? It was more like, I want to go over there. How do I get there? I'm restricted. Oh, if I take off my pants with the rope on it, I can get over to that tree. I can get over to that dog. It was always about the destination.
Which probably came super in handy with all your exits. Like that makes perfect sense. you see the end in sight.
I always see the end. Always see the end point from the beginning and work backwards from there. So when I mentioned that entrepreneurs are born and not made, when you look at the most amazing salesperson, salesman, saleswoman, the most amazing one who follows that rubric, who shows up early and makes the 100 phone calls every day, and they make those 100 phone calls because they know that they'll get 10 people to answer and that one person will buy, right? And they do that. They churn it out every day, and they're the number one performer all the time at whatever company that they're at. That person would make an amazing franchise owner.
Right.
And they can still be an entrepreneur, but they do it in a structured environment where they know the rules. So, but for me, those rules feel really uncomfortable, and I'm going to break the system. I'm going to ask Subway or McDonald's, hey, why can't I just sell a hamburger with 6 patties on it and call it the McJesse? Why can't I do that? Right? Consumers want it. How come I can't do it? And that's where there is just a unique difference between both types of entrepreneurs. They're both right, but when I think entrepreneur, I think of somebody more from a startup from the beginning, and building a thing that didn't exist and is completely novel, new to the world, versus the more structured franchisee, which is why they have a name called a franchisee.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, and that's the type that you are is the type that we focus on here, because I think that's the more fascinating type, in my opinion. So yeah, I totally see that distinction, though.
Yeah. On that subject, I mean, when you were earlier answering a question, use this term intrapreneur, like being an entrepreneur inside of a business. One of the things Jessica and I spoke about on an earlier episode is types of entrepreneurs. And I'm curious what your answer would be to that. How many types of entrepreneurs are there to Jesse, and what type of roles do they play in the business ecosystem?
For those challengers, that's us, right? Right, Jess? I think you fit in that same boat of like, I just kind of want to solve problems and I think we can do it a better way.
Yeah.
Those challengers, I believe that there's a challenger. I believe there's a conformist entrepreneur. And then I believe there's the curious who is the curiosity inflicted person who is unknown. The challenger will be a little bit more structured at some point they'll find the structure. I found my structure. I found the repeatability. I went into I didn't have any intention of running the business forever and ever. I wanted to get it started. Then I got bored. I wanted to exit. I wanted to do something new. And I just wanted to continue to challenge. The structured thinker, that's the guy who's going to work inside, go buy a franchise. And then there's that spot in between. Those are people who, I believe the difference between the two poles is their tolerance for risk. And they've had some sort of economic problem, or the endocrine system in their body, their fight or flight or freeze, is geared in such a way that they just can't make the move, but they sure do make a lot of noise inside of a company. Best example of that I heard came from Randy Hales, another mentor of mine. Randy Hales was CEO of a company called Back to Basics, and they had a blender with a spout on it. And that made some pretty decent headway in the early to mid aughts. It did pretty darn well. It was designed to make a margarita at home, and you could just you didn't have to pour anything out because it, when you pour a margarita, it splashes over the edges, which is why the margarita cup is so wide. Again,
they were solving the margarita pain point.
Right, solving the margarita pain point in your house, so I can have a margarita at home, and you put a spout at the bottom. No, I don't drink, but I know the pain from watching it. Well, then they did one for hot chocolate. They made a perfect froth for a hot chocolate, so they did really, really well with that. One of his tools, though, was his weekly meetings. He had his executives get together every week, and I've adopted this ever since I learned it. He has his big executive meeting, and he would bring one person from the line every week, a different person just selected at random to come and join and listen to these executives plan the lives of all the doers in this big company or this medium-sized company. One such guy, they would always turn and say, what else could we be doing differently? Or is there anything you're working on the side? Well, one day there's this engineer guy. He's like, yeah, I actually have a contraption that I built at home to make Egg McMuffins with, because I love the Egg McMuffin from McDonald's and I just wanted to make them on my own. So he says, outstanding, bring it in. And he brought in a toaster made of wood with heating elements inside the wood. And it had a flat heating spot where he could crack an egg, and another heating element where he put a piece of ham, and it would short out, but it would make him breakfast pretty much around the same, like it'd take the same few minutes to cook them all around the exact same time. Well, they turned that into a product. They took his idea and they went and submitted multiple patents on it, and they made the breakfast sandwich toaster where you crack an egg add a little bit of water, crack an egg into it, put a piece of ham in it, and it steams the ham, it steams the egg, and cooks your toast all at a perfect time, and all pops up at once. That's that guy who was still an entrepreneur, right? He was still wanted to solve human problems. It was natural curiosity in an unstructured way, but was not really risk tolerant. And it took a leader, like Randy Hales, to put together such a structure that could highlight a talent like that and turn into a revenue stream, a $100 million a year revenue stream for that organization. So I love looking at those guys, and like it is as an entrepreneur at the hospital. It was anytime you wanted to make a change in an organization, there were 7 work streams to think about. You had to think through the ripples of 7 different work streams to make any change in a hospital system. It's exceptionally complex. It's the doctors, it's the schedulers, it's the insurance, it's the laboratory, it's the imaging, right? It's the surgeons who are different than the regular GP doctors, and it's the referral systems, and how all those systems all work together to deliver patient care. But if you want to make one change on one, it ripples into all of the other ones. So I went and took the highest achievers out of all 7 orgs. I happened to be at a level that I could do that after I exited into there. And I said, hey guys, I know you're already high achievers. I know you guys are already killing it. Do you guys want to do more? And I said, let's go sit around and solve each other's problems. It was more efficient to try to solve problems together with all the people who could nothing's impossible for those who don't have to do it. I got all the people who had to do it into a room and to think about each other's problems. And every week we would get together like a gang, like Nancy Napier's gang. You should Google that and search up Nancy Napier and her gangs. Got together like a gang and would solve each other's problems. And it made it so the speed of innovation was nonstop. And these people who were really high achievers cared in an unstructured way, because they were such a high achiever. They were just driven by different goals. So that's why I see the 3 different types of entrepreneurs of where they are. There's probably more out there, but that's the 3 that I've seen.
You touched also on the concept of mentors, and I don't know if you have any thoughts on that to share, or like the value you've gotten from having mentors, or if you recommend that to people to seek that out and how you might do that. But I feel like it is a great way for people to learn. So what's your thoughts on that?
Sure. Mentors. I have a really unfair advantage with one of my mentors. But I will say that there's a difference between a coach and a mentor, right? So a coach is someone who is near to you or your direct leader. And that is a spot that you as a leader of your organization, and you have the people who report to you, that's a coaching environment. That's a spot where you can ask them to do harder things as it's part of their job. A mentor relationship is how usually you skip level or two, and it's who somebody wants to become one day. I encourage every entrepreneur and every senior leader of every organization to have a mentor, a safe place to go ahead and say dumb stuff to, and then listen and go to school on things. So I mentioned Nancy Napier, professor. I mentioned Randy Hales, entrepreneur. And I'm going to mention Jim Beers, the inventor of the inkjet printer. That's a really unfair advantage for me, and I'll tell you why in a moment. But Jim is a physical scientist who has over 100 patents in his name. He was a CTO at HP, CTO at Texas Instruments, CTO at Kodak, I believe. If not, I know he was over Kodak Research Laboratories. I know that for sure. Where he made inventions that just changed the world. When you look at the 3D printers, they are using the exact same technology that is in his pen technology on an inkjet printer. When I asked him about the inkjet printer, I said, "Where did you start?" And where did you start? And I thought he was going to start with human problem or something. He's like, impact printing is stupid. That's what he said. Impact printing was dumb, and we have two huge divisions at HP that did impact printing. So that's like your dot matrix, where a thing rubs up against a ribbon and left a residue behind, or a typewriter ball that would hit a piece of paper and leave an ink behind. He thought that those were unimaginative and that the world was being robbed when what the world wanted to do was have fonts at your desk. You could italicize a word or leave something bold or underline and not change a knob on a typewriter. That's what drove his curiosity. So that was the intended consequence. And one of the great piece of advice he's given me lots and lots of nuggets I use every day. He says it's impossible to get big without getting stupid. It's one of his biggest ones. The bigger your organization gets, you start making dumb decisions based on the people who are around you. Jim was always just curious about why big corporations did dumb things. And when I asked him about where he started, and I thought it would be someplace else, he said, I started with the medium I was going to print on, because I knew the impact printing was bad, but I started with the medium. He started with paper. And he says, I went and became an expert on paper. I had no idea. What? That is such a different way of thinking. He started on the medium, and he's a physical chemist. And so he went from there to look at how inks and chemistries and colors could absorb into the medium, into paper. And he became fascinated. So he became an expert in the paper, and he was already a physical chemist. He was always already an expert in dyes, but then how he could change the chemistry to bond to the paper in a fast manner. The unintended consequence, that's what he said. There you go, I got it. Okay. The piece he said is unintended consequence is what makes or breaks a company. He intended to change impact printing. He intended to give fonts. The unintended consequence was people printing pictures. He didn't he said, I didn't even think about it. I was just going to give people a way to print their fonts, which is why the first inkjet printers were so slow. We're trying to print a picture. It would do a line, and then it would stop and have to rethink, and then go back the other direction, and then stop and pause. It would take minutes to print, right? And now today it prints in seconds, and seconds isn't even fast enough if you're ever going to print something out, right? So, I mean, he's, as a mentor, he he knew when to, he never knew when to keep his mouth shut, but I was always ready for it, and I was always ready for when he was going to give that moment, and it was always repetitive. And another huge nugget from him I got is it's all about what you call the money, right? As an entrepreneur, because you're like, well, I'm trying to keep my money, my budget money for X, Y, and Z. I'm trying to my free cash flow, and I'm cash flowing on, I'm making sure I have to sell enough for this, and I have my marketing dollars. He says, dude, it's all about what you call the money, and that you're making it precious to you because of what you call the money. Really unfair advantage is my father-in-law, right? And I've been getting mentoring from him, mostly because his kids don't listen to him. I hope his kids don't listen to this, but his kids don't listen to him, and I always have. And so I've been able to benefit over the last 18 years of being married to his daughter, of listening to really brilliant coaching about, especially around innovation, about how to think and how to think about organizations, and back to him, he always grins, because I always give him homage, always give him credit for his amazing things.
Yeah, one thing I want to make sure we can chat about is one of those questions that I was really curious about, Jesse, is, we're talking about your entrepreneurial moments, and you're talking about we a lot, right? Because, of course, no one stands alone. You have partnerships. In your opinion, what's a good partner, and, any kind of stories that you want to describe about where partnerships, or even lessons learned from partnerships that didn't work out? Curious to hear.
Yeah. So a piece of advice I'm often asked about how when somebody's thinking about how to do a startup venture, where to start, and who do they do it with? You always hear about a couple people sitting inside of a garage or in a basement, and they're building a thing together. The biggest conflicts I've found are when there is not when it's a redundancy of skill inside of the same team. So when the partners who do the same thing with the same skills, fighting occurs because you look at the other person and measure yourself against them or them against you, and it's always going to be contentious. So I say, partner where you can't, hire where you don't want to.
Yep, that's great advice.
I have broken that I broke that once, and I had a 10-year long partnership with a wonderful human being, wonderful guy. I'm grateful for the years that we got to have. Absolute waste of equity. Mm-hmm. I lost a lot of cash because everything he could do, I could do, but he couldn't do what I could do. But he could do a lot of, in other areas he could do, like he was a whisperer. His expertise was whispering to clients. Now I could sell too, but that was his only differentiator. And I gave him away a lot of equity because I believed he had a skill when I met him. I believed he had a skill that he didn't actually have. I believed he was a formulator because he said that he formulated BSN's pre-workout, the very first workout, or the first pre-workout on the market, NO Explode. And what he did was source the ingredients. He didn't actually formulate. And that was a big mistake on my part. And I didn't do a better job vetting that. Now, I'm grateful for knowing him, grateful for the friendship, but when push came to shove and things got hard, he split. Mm-hmm. And so that's why partner where you can't, hire where you don't want to.
Yep. It's the stay. Yeah. No, determine your lanes and stay in them, and not try to. The overlapping is where it gets messy and egos get involved and things like that. I feel like
every time.
One thing we haven't talked about yet, and it's a bit of the rhino in the room for me, Jesse, is Rhino Rush. And if you want to talk about that, because I think that partnership you're talking about was a partner that you had in that space, and we don't have to talk about it, but if there's a story there that you want to share.
Whew. That's some drama. This is like television drama for entrepreneurs, this piece here. So I'm just trying to make sure that I don't get sued for any degree of slander. So I'm going to try to do my absolute best to speak nothing but positives and make sure I'm using experiences from my experience and from what I observed. Our first customer as a manufacturer was Rhino Rush. And that was when we had gone from designing, from brokering plastics to designing packaging to designing what went inside of packaging. So we formulated for this guy who had really bad, the product he had was illegal. And we looked at the label, and that's how we got a lot of business. Dominick and I just yesterday, I pointed out a can. I said, that's illegal on labeling claims.
So we're talking about, we were in Cincinnati, there was a CBD beverage that was just being sold as like a soda, basically. But it had like almost 5 milligrams of actually 5 milligrams of THC9, which is like more than just CBD.
Right. And they had a nutrition facts panel on it, which you can't do. It has to be a supplement facts panel for a food. And that has anything that has CBD in it. So that's how we got a lot of business. It was looking at labeling that was incorrect. And so we found Rhino Rush and visited with these guys and they were wonderful guys. I'll go backward. I'll tell you, these guys were like my amazing friends. I thought we got really close, and maybe there's a lesson in there about don't get too close to your clients, but we were really, really close for 7 years, where we manufactured for them. And we found, I think I went to church with one of the guys. I think it actually is one of the partners. I said, hey, you guys looking for new manufacturing by chance? And he says, yeah, we are. I said, yeah, because your labeling looks a little off. And he goes, yeah, our manufacturer's not good. And just so you know, everybody has a problem in the food and beverage, CPG, fast moving product space. Everybody has a problem with their manufacturer. Everybody. So
what's with those guys? Yeah.
Yeah. What's with those guys? Right. So he highlighted that. We created a new formula. We met him at Mr. Olympia, his other partner, who was his brother. And, we gave him some product to try. He tried it. It lit him up like a Christmas tree. He loved it. It was an amazing energy product. And relationship grew from there. He only liked to buy from people he was really, really, really close to. Our margins were outstanding on it. He thought he was getting a great deal. We were getting an amazing deal on it. And that's where I found the best deals is when everybody leaves the table feeling like they both are winning or everybody feels like they're losing. Those are the both, but he felt like he got a great deal, and we saved the business from the FDA. Well, as time went on, I was doing a ton of consulting work with just basic stuff of pricing and positioning and persona and placement. 4 basic P's of every product company. And he was very receptive to it. And that's what helped our friendship grow. I didn't know his pains to the three buyers that he had to deal with. So when you're trying to get into that retail space, you have the consumer, you have the store, and you have the wholesaler. And you have to make sure all 3 of them are happy in order to buy. And it's usually around price. That is what makes fast moving products work, that makes them move. So over these years, we were doing a lot of consulting, and we got really, really close, and like birthday parties and anniversaries and trips together. And we got really, really close. In the meantime, in the background, we're going out there selling a whole bunch of products to other brands and other major corporations, and we're growing bigger and bigger. But I signed a really bad non-compete with him where I wouldn't make any sort of competing energy product, which just killed us because we had a huge degree of expertise in energy products. October I was called a certain year, and now I'm getting to the spot. I got to be careful. He started acting like he was in trouble. I'm trying to think of how long that there's an NDA in place with this. So he started acting like he was in trouble, and wasn't paying his bills and owed us millions of dollars. And we just made an agreement to swap the company for his debt. And then he sued me. And that part's public. So you can Google that one. And then all of a sudden how fast the friendship went away. Because I mean, I didn't put him in debt. He put himself in debt. And our friendship went. And that's, I mean, we were friends. So we haven't talked since March of 2019, and got off of social media. When we acquired the company, it had $890,000 in accounts payable. It had $120,000 in accounts receivable, and had minus $30,000 in the bank, and I had just paid payroll for them. Fast forward a year later, I had to pay all of their sins, or else we would have lost placement. So I paid for all their debt and turned $1 million profit through really hard decisions. And I mean, to the point where Ryan Rush was selling at a negative in Speedway. Like one of the weirdest. I mean, they thought that the more they would sell within this rebate program, that they would eventually pull out money. But it's like, if you're paying 60 cents per unit for everyone they sell, you continue to pay 60 cents, and there's no way out of it. But the sales guys didn't know that. They didn't see the deal that was in place, because they didn't get the idea of the rebates that had to be in place. So, I mean, it's being an entrepreneur in the fast moving product space on the retail shelf, it is exceptionally hard. I mean, it is so hard because of the number of masters that are out there. So we learned it and we did it, and it was very hard battling the lawsuit, which just ended up going away. I mean, but I lost friends, plural. Everybody in that office I lost them with the exception of one. One guy recognized the lies that he was being told and left there and came back home to the brand. And when we actually exited to some of his friends, and now he's one of the owners of that company. And he and I are still great friends. And the new company, Drip Drop Distribution, who owns Rhino Rush now, great relationship with him. But that was an absolute painful thing. There's lots of lessons learned, like the products that never came to be. Like we were going to launch our own plant-based protein product. It was, oh my gosh, out of this world amazing. So good. Multiple trademarks on the thing. The absolute right approach. Everything was right on it. But when we were forced to have to foreclose on the company and acquire it, essentially we acquired it out of bankruptcy. I believed that I could only do one or the other. I didn't think about like hiring a product manager to run both. Like one product manager to run Rhino Rush and one to run Zuya, which is our protein company. I didn't think about that. And again, it gets to just the curse of being an entrepreneur. You just get too close and you miss the opportunities. But of course, hindsight is always 20/20. But that's one of the biggest learnings I've taken away is when you're in the muck, look for other options. Mentors, my mentors at that time, like Jim, being my father-in-law, was scared for me. So he wasn't given the best advice at that time. I didn't have access to Randy because he was in the middle of selling Zag, the company when he was another one of the companies he was a CEO of. So I was alone, and that alone feeling, oh man, and every decision you make, it's you. And everything's exploding in your face. So thanks for bringing up Rhino Rush. It's a lot of pain. It's a downer. We were still able to exit it. It was a profitable exit, and it blew up one of my partnerships too. Like some of the muck got hard. That's One of them split, the other one didn't, and he doubled down, and we got our way out. But yes, Rhino Rush, the nail in the coffin for Rhino Rush. So without any work, we were selling $100,000, and still to this day it still does it. I mean, without any marketing, it moves $100,000 a month on Amazon. No work, no effort. Unbelievable product. It goes to the power of building a product that works. You don't need any name behind it. You're a product company at that time. You're not a brand. You're a product company. Part of the problem with Rhino Rush is they didn't recognize that they were trying to be a brand in a 2-ounce shot space. They didn't recognize that there is no relationship in 2 ounces. You are designed to be discarded. You are designed to be hidden. You're designed to fit into a pocket. Nobody wears a 2-ounce bottle around their chest with a necklace like they do a Mercedes. Look, right? You don't. While our artwork and our logo was cool, part of their pain was that they spent too much work trying to be a brand instead of trying to be a product that solved the problem. There's plenty of money to be made for entrepreneurs who just design an amazing product and solve the need and do a really good job messaging how their product solves that human need. And they missed that, and we found it, and that's part of what we flipped. Then we got into the carbonated, caffeinated, electrolyte infused business, where we reinvented and made what the chief marketing officer of Coke said was the first functional beverage, the first truly functional beverage, and that was November of 2019. COVID, yeah. November, and in 4 days, we sold $70 million of rush water, and in 4 days in 4 stops throughout just Texas, and it was amazing. And I didn't have the money to fill it, right? So it's like one guy's like, I'll take. Let's see. I want. We had 6 SKUs. He wanted 10 cases of 6 SKUs per 4,800 stores. Raised money. I went out and raised money, and we went out and hit my bank relationships and introduced me to some amazing folks who were willing to look at this and take it on. And we took all these purchase orders were all in, getting ready to start shipping. They were supposed to ship February of 2020. And we didn't start manufacturing because things were feeling weird. And I left the money parked with that investor. He's like, well, when are you going to take the money? I mean, it was millions. I think we were taking $6 million to be able to manufacture all this to get inventory ready. And he's like, when are you going to take the money? I said, well, things are weird. He said, oh, it's going to pass. It's going to pass. I mean, it's stuff in Asia. Don't worry about it. And I'm like, things are weird. The market's behaving badly. Don't worry about it. And then we were supposed to be delivering in February. The last week of January, every order canceled. And the world froze. But the world didn't stop until April, right? We didn't have to start staying home from COVID until April of 20. But the market was acting weird at that period of time. So we pre-sold $70 million and never got to actually make it. So we pre-sold 70 million, then it all stopped. So what does that mean? It means that when I started raising money for another biotech startup thing I got going on the side over here called Halia Therapeutics. Well, I mean, I don't have any. Okay, we'll be back. My brother-in-law has it. I own nothing in it, but he's working on some really cool compounds that fight the inflammasome. Amazing stuff. But because I didn't take that money, when I called that investor back and I said, hey, remember how I didn't take the money? He goes, yeah, all those orders canceled, just so you know. He's like, oh my gosh, like, thank you for not taking the money. He told me about how entrepreneurs would just take money and pocket it. And there's nothing that the investors could really do about it. They always go and pay. They would run it through the system and pay themselves really big salaries, and there's nothing really nefarious stuff. And so he really appreciated that I didn't do that. So that got me another phone call. So treat your money well. Is another thing. Be really responsible to your investors. So turned him on to other investors. He's like, absolutely, I'll take a call for you, Jesse, anytime. And to this day, he'll still take any sort of entrepreneurial funding thing. He'll take my call for, and as demonstrated by Halia Therapeutics.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we'll probably let you get going pretty soon, but I did have a question just based on that story. What's your stance on being friends with your business partners now after having kind of a rough go at it, which is like super common? Or do you tend to be friends with your business partners close like that, or some people like to keep it a little more removed? So just curious.
So it actually fits into my part of my Clifton strengths is called a relator. So I'm always going to be close to a few people than I am a larger audience. One of my clients at a former from a former gig that I had for a global QSR restaurant was my kid's softball coach, became my kid's softball coach because of the close relationship that we have. So I'm going to probably always choose to be close to partners. I tend to always sell better to clients when there's that human, when I can just be human with them and build a real human touch. And I'm probably always going to do that just because of that's my second Clifton strength. My number two is that relator. I tend to just want to be close, but it's to a smaller group. So I don't know. I should probably learn a lesson from that. I've started at there's another venture that's looming out there for an acquisition with a friend. I've recognized that he can't do. I recognize that everything he does, I can do, and so I started backing off from there. So I am recognizing those behaviors in myself, the natural, like I want to work with people who I like, but I have to take my own advice and partner where I can't, not where, and hire where I don't want to. So I've followed that. It is hard advice because you want, there's a degree of trust. So how do you find somebody you trust who has different skills than you? Because you usually don't fish in the same ponds. Right? And if you don't fish in the same ponds, you don't have the same interests. So you don't have the same interests, and how can you get along? And then how does your boardroom feel, right? And that reminds me of like Jobs and Wozniak. Those two couldn't be too different from each other ever, right? They couldn't, or Roy and Walt Disney. While they were brothers, they got along completely different. Pretty well studied on the Disney brothers, but Roy, more accounting, more business, more brass tacks. Walt, ethereal, what could possibly be, imagine a world where, and but still very driven. But the person who made all of Walt's dreams come true was Roy. In that Walt would tell you that. Well, he did in several articles and interviews. Roy made him. Roy commercialized. Roy didn't have the ability to be imaginative and creative. He didn't have that ability. What he had was the ability to be creative with financing, creative with helping people see how the vision could be monetized. Walt couldn't be troubled with that. He was more about the product in the world. And so, me especially, I tend to be more Walt than I do Roy. But it may not sound like it through the interview, but I tend to be more like, that's why I say, of course I can. I'm too dumb to know that I can't do this, right? Finding that partner on the other side who can pull me back, it's harder because we don't fish in the same ponds. Like, when am I going to run into that person? How do you meet them? And it's usually because like these guys were friends and they start something from the ground up for the first time. It's because they were friends. They were sharing the problem together. They were at work together. They left the job together to go and do the thing together. I mean, that's how Woz and Jobs met. They were at Atari together, right? So fishing in that same pond. So it's hard if you're like, I want to go and start a thing, but I don't know where to start from. And I've never found somebody to partner with that I didn't somehow know or wasn't one person removed from.
Jesse, I know that at least for myself, I've got to wrap and really appreciate all of your time, expertise, knowledge. Always love chatting with you. Anything that you want to plug right now? Any project that you're working on that you want to share that will, knowing your audience in this podcast is going to be either current entrepreneurs, business owners, or people who are just passionate about business in general. This is your forum to pitch an idea or plug something. And if there's nothing that comes to mind now, we'll send me a link and we can put it in the episode description too.
Yeah, I know. There is nothing, no product to push, no thing to, no agenda, no item for me to sell. But if there is one thing to be able to speak to an entrepreneur is, there's a lot of fluff out there and there's a lot of really bad advice. And, some people get their news from big podcasts, and I don't want to say their name because I don't want to get sued, but there's certain people who are loud and pompous and tell people to drop out of if you have the next greatest idea and you're in college right now, just go ahead and drop out of school now and go and pursue that dream. There's bad advice out there. I go back to entrepreneurs. They kind of know who they are because they kind of don't fit. You already know who you are because you don't fit. You didn't do great in school because you're like, what's the point? You didn't see the point in it. You already know that that's who you are. You already know that you're a wanderer. You already know that limitations are confusing to you and you feel like you need to challenge them. So that's who you are. And if that's who you are, then go ahead and explore. But nothing can prepare you for the loneliness that you will encounter when there is conflict. It is lonely, and all the advice will go away. All the loudmouths who were there before, they're all gone. They all go away when things get hard. And that lonely space can make you, can change you. It can make you who you're going to be next. It will change you, but don't let it change the optimism in the humans that are around you. Still find joy in human contact. I will tell you, like, for me, in that loneliness of things, of exiting to a dishonest partner, I exited one business to someone who was really dishonest, a dishonest group, nefarious in nature, and still trying to get paid back on that one. I isolated. I started watching science fiction stuff. So, like, I can tell you now why I did science fiction. I was watching Star Trek. Like, why was I watching Star Trek? Because it was humans who had human problems with and make-believe place that it was just real enough that it could relate as a human being, but it was just so far out there that it seemed like I could escape from whatever world I was in. It was lonely. It was lonely for my wife because I was just trying to medicate myself that I could get through the thing. And nobody knew that pain. Nobody knew the scariness. And nobody will ever. So is there a forum for us when we're feeling that way? I don't know. I don't know if that exists. I don't know if I would have used it when I'm going through it, because I was so heavy and it was all on my shoulders. I'll tell you, the best thing that you could do though is talk about it and find somebody to. My sweet wife was amazing about it, but it was breaking her too. So being an entrepreneur, like, that's why I say, like, the advice that you get out there, go out there. If you have the passion, you have the thing, just quit what you're doing and just go do it. That's spoken from somebody who has never felt how lonely it is to be an entrepreneur. How lonely it is when things are hard. When things are great, everybody wants something from you. Everybody wants to sell you a thing. Everybody has advice. Everybody wants to be close to you when things are going great. But when things suck, crickets.
Thank you so much for joining us today. As always, it's so nice to be able to speak with entrepreneurs who have had different experiences and take away some interesting lessons that we can all apply in our entrepreneurial journeys. If you'd like to reach out to the show, Jessica and I are happy to hear from you, and we'd love to have any entrepreneurs on who'd like to share their journeys with us. So again, please share with your friends, and thank you for joining us on another great episode. Until next time.